Hello, welcome to week 5 of our course. I look forward to working with you during this week. The assignments for this week are similar to previous weeks. You will be completing knowledge path activities, you will be participating in a discussion board forum, and you will also be completing a writing assignment. Remember that your initial post to the discussion board forum is due by the end of the day on Thursday, and that your responses to other students' comments or my comments are due by the end of the day on Saturday. The writing assignment is also due by the end of the day on Saturday. The theme for this week is freedom versus security. Now, these are two values, two beliefs that we want in society, right? We all want freedom and we all want security as well. But at times, these two things can be in tension with each other, or be presented as in tension with each other. So there is a serious question of how to balance the need for security with the need for freedom. Clearly, at times, the federal government has used fear to promote or to justify restrictions on freedom in ways that are unjust. One example of this was the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II. After the Pearl Harbor attacks in early 1942, President Franklin Roosevelt ordered that all Japanese Americans living on the West Coast be relocated to internment camps, essentially prison camps, against their will. And this included Japanese American citizens and non-citizens alike. The justification given for this was that Japanese Americans supposedly posed a threat to America, a threat of committing acts of sabotage against the United States. There is really no sound basis for this argument. There wasn't a single example of a Japanese American actually carrying out an attack against the United States. So most scholars today would argue that this was clearly an example of security concerns and fears being used illegitimately to restrict the freedom of Americans. Another example where the rights and freedoms of America were trampled, most scholars would argue unjustly, was during the McCarthy era. Clearly, the Soviet Union did pose a threat to the United States during the late 40s, during the 1950s, 1960s. The Soviet Union was the principal global power confronting the United States in many parts of the world. Unfortunately, this led to a massive crackdown against purported or supposed communists within the United States in the 1950s. While there were a small number of communists in the United States in the 1950s, McCarthyism became a witch hunt. It was fueled by somewhat irrational fears, and Joseph McCarthy, the senator from Wisconsin who led the movement, accused many people of being communists with little to no evidence. And many people's lives were destroyed simply based on the accusation, the unfounded accusation that they were communists. There were Hollywood actors that were prohibited from employment, essentially. There were many individuals who lost their jobs in academia due to unfounded suspicions that they were communists. So clearly, we don't want to overreact and destroy innocent people's lives in the name of security. Now, a more recent example of the concern about security, of course, came with the September 11th attacks in 2001, which I certainly, remember vividly, and I'm sure many of you do as well. Reasonably, the September 11th attacks caused increased concern about terrorism in the United States, and particularly terrorist attacks by Islamic radical groups. fundamentalist groups like Al-Qaeda. So the United States government implemented a number of new laws and policies to try to make the United States more secure. And these laws ranged from increased security at airports, going through additional screening to get on a plane, to the Patriot Act, which gave the federal government sweeping power to conduct surveillance of U.S. citizens and non-citizens alike, to intercept Americans' phone calls, to intercept all sorts of electronic communications, in order to try to discover any future plots, future terrorist plots. This was very controversial, and it raises the question again, is this sacrifice of freedom necessary? Does it make us safer? And did the government go too far in increasing surveillance of Americans in response to September 11th? I think the verdict on this amongst scholars is still out. I think it will be some decades before historians reach a clear conclusion about whether acts like the Patriot Act went too far or were necessary to protect American freedom. But certainly it is a controversy that's significant. One very negative aspect of the response to September 11th is that it led to increased discrimination against Muslim Americans and against individuals from the Middle East and South Asia, even if they aren't Muslims. There were instances of hate crimes being committed against Muslim Americans and others, which clearly were unjust and clearly were limiting Americans' freedoms without any justifiable basis. Just as Japanese Americans were involved in the attack on Pearl Harbor, Muslim Americans weren't involved in the September 11th attacks and shouldn't be, persecuted for that. So I think you'll find it to be an interesting unit. I'm sure it will spark interesting discussion, and I look forward to working with you during this week. Thank you.